My name is Justin Johns, and for my final project, I wanted to analyze the trending value of U.S. exports. So, as I get into my final project, I wanted to look at a few things. First, I wanted to look at the U.S. comparison to China, China being a top competitor of the U.S. in total exporting per trading economics. So, within my research, China was a top performer in export value against the U.S. So, I wanted to analyze the comparison of U.S. to China, and also wanted to understand if there were any major national or global events that were a portion or would affect those trends throughout that 20-year data. So was able to pull the data from tradingeconomics.com and utilize their information here for this U.S. and China comparison. Overlaid that data in this mountain graph and provided some trend lines to show that it's a continual increase in trending for total export value both for the U.S. and China. However, the U.S. does have a higher market capitalization and total export value compared to China. In 2008, it is obvious there that there was a sharp decline in total export value. Around September of 2008, that was when the Federal Reserve Chair had made the decision to produce a bill to Congress to bail out some of the banks within the U.S., and Congress denied that bailout, and as a result, we had that market burst in 2008. So it was easy to identify that downturn within the market, so it did impact the total export value. However, if you look out across the past 20 years, it was a little more difficult to identify any other major national or global events that affected export value. So knowing that U.S. had a top competitor being China, and knowing that there was a significant correlation there in exporting, what I wanted to then understand was where did the states within the U.S. stand compared to exporting. So moving to my next chart, I worked to develop a heat map looking at all of the states within the U.S. Out of those states, the top performers were Washington, Texas, and Louisiana, with New York and Kentucky not being far behind. When you hover over the state, you can obviously see that Washington was close to 180,000, 985 right there. Those dollars are in millions, so total export value of Washington was close to 181 billion. Conversely, wanted to look at some of the lower performing states from a business standpoint. So if you look at one of the lower performers, South Dakota was around 378 million. So quite a big difference there. Obviously, from a majority exporting standpoint, you can see that Washington, Texas, Louisiana, and New York are all coastal states. So it makes sense from an exporting perspective that they would be, big producers from materials or oil or fossil fuels. So that kind of brings me to my next point. One of the additional items I wanted to look at was we've got the top states. We know the U.S. is outperforming China from an export standpoint, but what are those top exports and how would they potentially behave over the next or over the past 4 years worth of data? So I should preface this to say that the data was pulled from the U.S. Census Bureau, so I was able to pull 4 years worth of data from the U.S. Census Bureau. The data was jumbled quite a bit from a formatting standpoint. There were a number of different headings and title columns that did not necessarily transfer over into Tableau well, so I had to clean up the data a good bit before I dumped it back into Tableau. So just cleaning it up by reformatting the columns to where they were legible before they went into Tableau, and it saved me a lot of work on the back end within Tableau. So to my comment earlier about analyzing the top exports, surprisingly enough, one of the major exports of the U.S. is civilian aircraft engines and parts. So looking at this data from the Census Bureau, they have a number of codes associated with each export. These are listed here. in this table tabularly. That was one of the easier ways for me to be able to represent this information, due to just some of the nomenclature was pretty lengthy whenever I dumped it on a graph. So I wanted to show that civilian aircraft engines and parts represent almost 405 billion worth of the total U.S. export value. So a pretty significant number right there, with petrol, oil, and crude oil following not far behind it at close to 68 and 70 billion. Diamonds and minerals followed not far behind that, right around 50 billion. The next portion of that, I wanted to pull all this together in a executive level dashboard. So I wanted to be able to clearly show that we've got our top competitor, we've got our top exports by rank, we've got the value of those exports, and additionally we've got the top performing states in those exports. So all of that's pulled together here on the dashboard. And from an executive level perspective, the goal was to be able to present this to management, allow them to visualize the information, and be able to make an executive level decision on next steps. From there, I would anticipate that there would be some further work from my team as a data analyst, and we would have to further dig into maybe some additional metrics that they would like to see. The dashboard is interactive. We have the capability of moving over each individual state that they would like to see, present that value to them real time, as well as look at the top export or a particular date range for USA in comparison to China. So that is my storyboard for Tableau, and that is what was pulled together from a dashboard perspective and presenting to management. I feel that this would suit the application that was developed and part of my data analysis. Holistically, it provides insight into how exports are going to trend over the next few years, provided there's no major economic downturn. It also provides insight on how the states perform across the U.S. in exporting. And then it also gives you a little insight as to what some of those top exports will be. There's a pretty big gap in between oils and aircraft engines and parts, so I would anticipate that aircraft tends to stay at the forefront for the time being. Again, unless there's any major economic upsets, and we could anticipate on pursuing more business ventures within that specific export as opposed to others if it were a business decision. That's all I have for now. Thank you for your time.